Love is a feeling you feel when you're feeling a feeling you've never felt before. Or is it? I wish I could say that I came up with that phrase myself, but that's actually Dr. Beam's phrase that we use here at Marriage Helper, but it's kind of true, isn't it? When we fall in love or when we're feeling those feelings of love, it's unlike a feeling we've ever had before. The emotions, they're things that you just want to keep feeling, but over time, as the relationship develops, most of the time, those intense, strong feelings fade. Does that mean that you've fallen out of love? No, not at all. Does that mean that it's something different, that maybe we aren't thinking of love the way that love actually is? Perhaps. There's a term that you've probably never heard before. Some of you may have if you've been following Marriage Helper, but it's called limerence. Back in the 1970s, a researcher and sociologist named Dr. Dorothy Tinov came up with the term limerence to express the term of someone who is, quote-unquote, madly in love with someone else. Now, when people are feeling madly in love, they exhibit different things, symptoms, so to say, if I may say that word, that are different than people who are in love, but they've been in a stable relationship over a longer period of time. Limerence is actually something that affects the brain, and it affects it very much like an addiction. There's a chemical reaction. Your chemicals, your serotonin and your dopamine in your brain start changing. And a little later, after Dorothy Tinov came up with that term, another researcher, Dr. Helen Fisher, did even more research on what is this limerence. And she would put people into fMRI machines. And in these fMRI machines, she would show these people who said that they were madly in love with someone else, she would show them a picture of the limerent object, or the person that they were madly in love with. And they found in the MRI machines that when that picture came up in front of their face, there were certain parts of the brain that just lit up in ways that other parts of the brain weren't. And so limerence began, more research done on it, and come to find out limerence is actually a state of when someone is madly in love with someone else. And it's characterized by different things, such as thinking about the other person 85% of the time. It's almost obsessive, of not being able to see the negative things in another person. Now, limerence is a kind of love. Limerence usually begins at the beginning of a relationship, and a lot of relationships go through limerence. Limerence in and of itself is not a bad thing. It's not something that should be shameful or that people should feel badly about, as long as two people have a right to each other. If two people are both single, they're both free to date whoever they want, and the person that they're with is good for them, they're not a bad influence, they're not getting them into things that they shouldn't be in, then limerence is fine. It can be natural. It doesn't happen for everyone, but it does happen for a lot of relationships. The reason and the time where limerence becomes a negative thing is when two people do not have the right to each other. When two people are both married, or one of them is married, or they're destructive for each other. Then what happens when this limerence starts happening, but you're in a relationship like a marriage, but you're having limerence with someone who you're not married to, is you start seeing your marriage or the relationship that you're in, the stable relationship that you're in, you start seeing it differently. You start rewriting history. You start saying, I never felt the way that I feel about my limerent partner, the way that I feel about my husband or about my wife. Because you see, you don't. You see, even if a relationship starts with limerence, what happens when the two people have a right to each other is that they get to the point where they build an actual life together. Limerence will fade, because part of limerence is it does fade. It lasts anywhere from 3 months to 48 months, but when you're in the middle of it, you believe it will never fade and that things will always be this way. But limerence does fade. So the real question is can you build a life and a future together with the person that you're in love with, but that love also includes limerence? Can you build that future with them together so that through the thick and the thin, no matter what happens, when the halo effect wears off, when you start seeing their flaws, you're still going to want to be with that person? Or if you don't have the right to each other, You start making terrible decisions because the limerence affects your ability to think straight. And then you start making these decisions to end your stable, committed relationship and to go into relationship with the limerence partner, and we see it end very badly. So, to answer the question, is love the same as limerence, and what is the difference in love and limerence? Yes. Limerence is a type of love, but it is a very selfish type of love, and it is a short-lived type of love. It's something that can only last for a very short period of time, and the whole focus of limerence is, how does it make me feel right now? Because as long as it's making me feel good, and as long as I like the way that things are when I'm in it, then I want to continue in it. But once you move past that point, and once the relationship moves to where you have to start thinking about, if we're going to make this work, it can't just be about how I feel. It has to be a long, committed, selfless type of love. That's where the transition occurs. So true love, so to say, the love that will outlast limerence, the love that builds a committed foundation, is something that lasts and can last and should last for a lifetime. It's absolutely capable to last for that long. But the problem is many people give up too soon. When they stop feeling those feelings that they've never felt before, they start thinking that something's wrong and that they married the wrong person, or their relationship isn't like everyone else's. But the truth is, no relationship can stay in limerence for a long period of time. Limerence in and of itself isn't a bad thing as long as you have a right to the other person. And if limerence does start with someone and they do start ending their current relationship and start pursuing that limerence with the other person, then sooner or later they will begin to see the things that they gave up for that relationship, for that limerent relationship. And most of the time people realize that they resent the fact that they had to give up the things that they gave up. Many people leave children, many people leave wonderful marriages, and over time they begin to realize that. So the goal is, if you have a spouse who's involved in limerence with someone else, know that there is an end. And the best thing that you can do right now is to continue to be the best person that you can be, so that when the limerence eventually does end, that doesn't mean that your spouse is automatically going to be ready to come back, because your spouse is going to want to come back when they believe that they're going to something better. So you have to be the better. Continue to work on yourself physically, intellectually, emotionally, and spiritually, and we'll talk about what those mean and those 4 different types of attraction in another video. But always know that there is hope, and that the hope is for finding and enriching and stabilizing and having that committed relationship that has that true love, where it's committed, you're building a foundation together, you're focusing on each other, and you're saying that I'm going to be here even when I don't like how it feels, day in and day out, for the rest of our lives.